And I'll even go one further, because I think the most outrageous part about this story, I nailed it earlier, it isn't even the specifics that it was Danny and what happened to him. It's that this appears to be a systemic problem in the org. If you go and read Richard's reporting, they don't. I always make this distinction because people miss it. People will make a story into one thing that happened. So what they'll do is they'll do this. Well, EG just made a mistake, Richard. It's like, no. In this scenario, they made mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. And eventually, when the mistakes all have a pattern that someone's saying to you, you know what? I've noticed something's wrong with this guy. Something's going wrong with this guy. This guy needs help. This guy needs... If you keep saying no, eventually it's not a mistake. It's what you wanted to happen. It's the choice that you made. You weighed up the thing. You had many chances to change your mind and reverse direction. You had 3 different playoff series, but every single time that someone brought it to you, no matter what amount of evidence or statement or opinion or authority they had, you always just went with, have him keep playing. There's even that angle that I found mad disturbing to even read, where when it's phrased how Danny came to this decision to play in the match against Team Liquid, it's like, it sounds like he just went into a room by himself with the fucking CEO of the org, who was a provable liar, by the way, and then magically he comes out of that room, a vulnerable person who's potentially on the autism spectrum and is a brand new rookie player, 1 year into their career, comes out of that room with his actual boss of his entire life, basically, and goes, I have decided to play. I can't believe that in good faith. I'm sorry. That makes me so uncomfortable to even read. And then the one last thing I'll say is this. It would be bad. This is another thing I keep hitting and people keep missing. It's like what I said about the Lena scenario. It's like what I said about what Frankie said about the Saudis. It's worse than they were just like wrong or they said something they've been caught in. Actually, if you look at the moral decision they have made by changing their course, they have actually implied they used the very serious topic as a chess piece just for their own self-aggrandizement, even if they knew their actions were the opposite. So let me very quickly read you a few things out that Nicole LaPointe Jameson, the CEO of Evil Geniuses, has said publicly about the Danny situation. As soon as he was self-benched and finished the match against Team Liquid, she did a post, which I've told you, made some people very uncomfortable in the org. Some people were literally like, that's it for me when they read this. In the post, it said, these are some quotes. She put, we will continue to support him. Obviously not true, by the way. They did the exact opposite of that. In the same post, we're a family. I mean, technically, it could be a really fucked up, abusive family, I guess. And then, how about this one? They put that we support each other through every situation. Her words, not mine. And then, are you ready for this sentence? Goes, we encourage you. How fucking dare you even have an opinion or prescription for me, by the way? For me. I judge you morally, Evil Genius. You don't judge me or give me advice. So it said, we encourage you to remember that players are humans too, and that they dedicate their lives to this game with the weight of the world on their shoulders for our entertainment. No, motherfucker, for your market value. That's apparently why they do that. Those sentences, here's the thing, that isn't just gross. That's like actively horrible. That's like, in this scenario, that's like you want to be dad of the year when you're actually the one abusing your own child. What the hell is that? Like, that's this is one area I know people will miss, because to me it's like the contrast is so crazy. People might just think they're just saying the things you do in corporate. No, here's the other thing as well, and Richard nailed this years ago. You can just say no comment. You don't have to say these things. You've gone out of your way to have the goal to pretend you're the one protecting and supporting this guy. Whereas as far as we can tell, and it was mirrored by Richard's reporting, there are a very, very select few people in that org make decisions. And in this case, love, you're directly name checked as the one who convinced him to play the game, when apparently later on after that game, Riot agreed with you. He just can't even physically play anymore. Therefore, you get a magical sub that comes from fucking Narnia out of a cupboard to just play the game. Like, that whole thing sits so badly with me, guys. Because it's the idea, not only they're getting away with it, but they're the cocksuckers who are going to pretend they're the good guys too. I cannot abide by that part.
Yeah, and the thing is, to Richard's point of like, you know, when does Riot step in? Like, why are they, you know, taking such a back seat? I can't speak specifically to like the current rule set off the top of my head vis-a-vis like player welfare or whatever, but historically, Riot have a history of literally creating rules to keep as much distance and responsibility as possible away from themselves. Going back years, first it was these contract templates that they put in the agreements with the teams to participate in the leagues, where basically Riot wrote out these illegal contracts, by the way, for teams to sign. They were not legally viable in Germany for how the LCS was set up. to play, for the teams to give to their players for them to be able to participate in the league, but made it absolutely explicitly clear in the contract, we have no responsibility if you were to use these contracts. We don't vouch for them in any way, blah, 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 blah. And there was loads of retroactive stuff when people are saying, hey, like the government's coming after us. Like, what the fuck's going on? Like, no, remember the little small print at the bottom? We have nothing to do with this. It's a suggestion. It's not a real contract. Then they had all the stuff with the poaching nonsense. Like, for example, a real thing that actually happened. If people remember when Caps was poached from Fnatic to G2, and Fnatic were very upset, but ultimately they didn't pursue it. There was also one with H2K and Odawamne and G2 and all these kinds of things. And ultimately, multiple times, a collaboration of teams went to Riot and said, hey, we're not even involved in this move, but we feel like we have the facts and we're here to support Team X. We think this is really wrong. And look at all this fucking evidence, as Ven and Mithy as well, by the way. Look at all this fucking evidence for these players being poached. What are you going to do about it? And they were like, did you not read the small print? There is a 6-month statute of limitations on this rule. So basically, we are doing nothing. You can give us the most black and white, smoking gun, dead body in the bathroom. It does not matter. We will do nothing. And that is just absurd on the face of it when you think about it. Because obviously, if you're putting together a case against someone, it could easily take 6 months just to gather your, do discovery and put everything together. So they have a history of always trying to distance themselves from actually having to take any responsibility themselves whatsoever. And you can imagine that since the huge class action discrimination lawsuit, gender lawsuit, and so on, this is only going to get worse, right? Like, there's no incentive for them to bring themselves closer to these situations. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't see that ever really changing unless there's some kind of fucking government intervention or another lawsuit. Like, I just don't see it.
Oh, by the way, I forgot one other tweet Nicole made, which is she actually made a tweet European time today in response to Danny's tweets, where she just replied, we always have your back. We know, we have your back, comma, always, heart sign. Like,
yeah, and I think
it's just so beyond the pale, mate.
By the way, how those work, just so people know, I'm not joking. I've seen this like a multitude of times. Players will send me screenshots. They'll just make a small little chat group on Discord or something, and I won't use her name in case it's deemed as an accusation, but the CEO of said org will basically say, I'm going to tweet this, you're going to like and retweet it, and then you're going to write something along these lines that say you support it. That will have been what will have happened most likely. Like, it's the most fabricated, placating to the average Reddit idiot nonsense you can imagine.
Yeah, and I think also we should talk about who Nicole LaPointe Jameson is, because I think it informs a lot of the conversation around what happened, because it's important to note that she doesn't come from an esports background, and she's very, very young. When she became CEO of Evil Geniuses, so Evil Geniuses is owned by Peak Six, which is a venture capital firm that also does asset management for people. So they are a speculative entity that owns this team, probably as many venture capital investors have been in the esports space, in a hope of growing this and flipping it, selling it to somebody else in the long term in order to make large profit. Now, Evil Geniuses as a team was in the very early days, back when Alex Garfield still owned it, part of the early days of the LCS. But then later they divested to a team called Winter Fox, and there was we're not going to go into the whole fiasco that happened at the time with Twitch acquiring Good Game Agency, which was owned by Alex Garfield, which was owned Alliance as well. And so they had kind of a team in Europe and a team in North America. And then Twitch actually owned these teams, and that got really messy with other esports team owners, because they were signing streaming deals with Twitch while Twitch owned teams and was trying to compete against them for players. So there was a massive conflict of interest, which then basically led to the EG brand just kind of dying, because Twitch couldn't have this conflict of interest anymore. There were potential lawsuits going to be filed by the other esports teams in the space. So EG kind of just vanished for a bit. Then the brand itself was bought by Peak Six. Okay, and they were not Evil Geniuses was not part of the initial LCS franchising effort. They purchased the slot from Echo Fox when Echo Fox exploded due to their own, their basically Maybe you guys can go look at this. One of their investors had said a bunch of like quite racist things about Rick Fox, and then Riot said you have to get this guy out of your cap table, or you can't have this LCS slot. They were unable to do that from a corporate perspective, so they had to sell the slot, and it fucked everything up for them. They sell it to
an interesting case, by the way, Monty, to reference right now as a precedent, really, isn't it? The idea that when something fucked up happens inside an org, you can come and take the slot away and tell them they have to get rid. Oh, that's interesting.
Well, you have to get rid of the person, but if the person like owns too much of the company and refuses to like give it up, sometimes they're not great ways to like eliminate their ownership, right? Because you can't just the company can't seize the ownership from that person, so they kind of have to agree in certain ways to get bought out. This guy was not agreeing, and so they were like, "Well, you have to sell your slot." So anyway, they buy this slot. So Peak Six, which bought the EG brand, which is one of the big legacy brands in the West in esports. It's arguably the most famous. It's among the most famous Western brands. It is the most famous American brand. If we look at esports history, is that fair to say, Thorin? Complexity, maybe
probably.
would be the other one.
Yeah, but the difference is complexity. Until the Dallas Cowboys wasn't like a giant org in terms of like money and revenue and things. It was more like a medium-sized org. So I would say like it's, if you have to pick like the alpha dog of American esports over all of history, it'd probably be Evil Geniuses.
Yeah. So even though they were kind of vanished for a while during some of the biggest peaks in esports, there was still this big legacy and a fan base of people who really liked them for being the endemic brand, right? And they thought very fondly of the Dota and the StarCraft 2 days. So anyway, Peak Six. Now remember that these franchise slots cost $10 to $12 million, depending on whether you were an existing LCS team or trying to come in. So we can assume that by 2019, when this spot was bought from Echo Fox, that it probably was sold for 20 million, more than that potentially. Like those numbers haven't been released, but we can just assume that it was more than what Echo Fox bought it for at that time, especially since that was before the viewership of LCS started to kind of decline precipitously, as we've seen, over a number of years since then. So what happened is that Nicole LaPointe Jameson was working for Peak Six and was installed in 2019 as the CEO. She was 25 years old with no esports experience. She currently is not 30 years old and is in charge of this organization. And I think that as somebody myself who was, owning a team at approximately the same age that she was, my guess here is that I don't think what she is doing is malicious, but I think that this was a very complex situation that she didn't know how to handle and thought it would maybe go away. And like I am a person who sympathizes with that as somebody who is in a somewhat similar situation. But I don't think that we are talking about a management structure that has extensive experience in managing companies, right? This is still run by somebody who is relatively young, especially compared to many of the other LCS teams. And really the only comparable people who are in CEO positions at LCS teams who are younger are people who literally started these teams in like 2012 when they were teenagers, right? And have retained that ownership position. So it's pretty unusual, to say the least, that she would be put in this position of power, and also that she would be capable or understand how to handle complex situations, or indeed really even understand the esports space, because she's not endemic to it.
I would just say to that, I was running HGK at 22 years old, and I didn't really, so far as I had any issues, one of the things, and I was endemic to the space. I'd been a player in other games, I knew the space intimately, but as soon as it reached a point where I was I could do with some help in certain areas, I stepped down as CEO myself. That was a decision I made entirely by myself. I was you know what? I'm going to run gaming, because gaming's what I know at this point. I don't necessarily have the business acumen that these big American business people that I'd gone into partnerships with were. So we appointed someone who was more appropriate at the time. So I have sympathy in the sense that I can understand when you are young and inexperienced, that you are young and inexperienced. But at the same time, to me, it's just narcissism to think that fuck it, I'm just going to do it, and I do know it, and it doesn't matter that I know nothing about esports. I think I can still do it, and I'm going to put out all these statements. I'm going to make all the big girl decisions. Like, to me, you made your own bed and that bed's on fire. Like, congratulations. Like, you should have had more self-aweress. So I have to say I don't really share the sympathy on that. So, as I said, having been in the same position, sure, esports was before franchising, whatever, but at a younger age, and I didn't really end up, putting people who, and by the way, I work with a lot of very mentally ill people. I'm not going to go line by line and list them all, but yeah, I think this, not for me.
I want to push back on this as well, because here's my problem, right? The notion that she's young and inexperienced, right? This is the Lena defense all over again, and I'm so bored of this, right? You cannot simultaneously tell me in esports and gaslight me that these women are the most genius, brilliant people who can do things even men can't do, and that they deserve write-ups in the Washington Post with Overly May explaining how already this individual's done things in the industry other people just couldn't do. No mention of what or who or what, who they're even contrasted with. You can't do that. Tell me these people are 30 under 30 Forbes. These are the young visionary leaders, the women that are leading esports. But then the second they fuck up, pretend they're an 80-year-old girl at her birthday party that we're all being mean to by not just letting it go. Which is it? Are these responsible people with power and influence? By the way, that comes with responsibility if you've ever read a fucking Spider-Man comic. Or are they just these people who are protected, don't do anything wrong? They never. In that case, stop fucking giving them the plaudits. If you get the fucking credit, you get the blame also. That is literally the game of esports. It's a fucking performance industry. You get fired if you do a bad job as a player and a coach. Guess what? You get promoted. You get the plaudits if you win as the player and the coach. So in this scenario, all I'll say is this obvious contrast. Imagine every single thing that was done by Nicole Lapointe Jameson wasn't done by a woman or a woman called Nicole Lapointe Jameson. Imagine it was done by a man called Andy Dinn. Imagine he did all these things. Would everyone be going, well, when he 15 times, that's a made up number here, said there's no problem with the potentially autistic person breaking down and begging not to play, for the 15th time when I tell you no, this isn't malicious ever because don't know, I'm a woman or something. What are we even talking about here, guys? I'd spin it the other way, Monty. What would she have to do to prove she's malicious? Write an actual note called, yes, I did it. Ha ha ha, fuck Danny. I'm glad he's really hurt and all that. By the way, when I said all that stuff about only caring about his market value and protecting EG the org, that was actually me, quite obviously being, you know what I mean? I'd spin it back to you, mate. I don't think it's a falsifiable position. I think you've set it up essentially to be too kind to her. That I'm sure she, I'd go the other way. I'd say when someone repeatedly refuses to acknowledge things, it's like Rich says, in this scenario, mate, it's like if the analogy would be she's someone who never had a child of her own, right? And she becomes an adoptive parent. What a brilliant thing for society, going to adopt a child. She fucks up and the child is malnourished, fucked up, has all problems. You can't at the end go, well, I never knew much about raising kids. Then don't have one. And even worse, don't at the end tell me you loved that kid the most and none of it happened and covered the shit up. And then in this analogy, try to fob them off on another parent so that when they go to the next foster home and break down, you go, well, that wasn't really happening when he was with me. That's the problem. I'm not doing it just as an attack on you, Monty, but I just think a lot of people will take your position just because this is a woman. I think that's fucked up, by the way. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.